guys, and welcome. Today we're going to be painting this surreal piece right here. Now, if you know me, if you know the channel, you know that I don't really do surreal or fantasy type paintings. Not because I don't like them, I've never really thought about it. And a couple weeks ago over on Patreon, I asked what everyone wanted to see, and overwhelmingly the answer was fantasy and surreal paintings. So I looked at this as A, a little intimidating, but B, a chance to learn. And I feel like that's really what I did in this one. I restarted the sky 3 times because each time I did it, I was like, I know how to do this better. I can do this better. And then I'd restart and waste another half hour. But essentially, today we're painting this spiral landscape scene. If you know me, you know that I also love turning everything into moonlit scenes. So I'm thinking about doing a moonlit version of this. I'm also thinking about doing one with kind of the 4 seasons on either side. So let me know if you like that idea. Also, what other fantasy / surreal paintings would you like to see? I'm really curious because I had a lot of fun with this one. As per usual, you can get the full hour to 2 hour long version up over on Patreon. That's the version without any cuts. You can also get the reference photo for it to help you with the drawing process, which I get could be very useful with this one because it's not a traditional landscape, it's very different. But you can find that up over there, and you can find the other 40-hour long lessons up on Patreon as well. Thank you so much for stopping by, and let's jump into today's hour-long cut-up lesson thing. I'm going to begin here by taking my medium-sized round-headed brush, dipping the tip of it in some water. This is going to condense the bristles, extend the wet life of my paint, and help me drag it out a little bit farther. Then I'm going to grab some titanium white, move that down here on my palette, going to grab a hint, and I do mean a hint, of primary blue, and mix that in there. And I just want almost an off-white pigment here, and I'm going to apply this in the middle of our sky. And then I'm just going to move it out in circular motions from that middle application. And I'm using the round-headed brush here because it doesn't have any harsh, sharp edges like a square-headed or flat-headed brush. So I get a very soft application with it. Now, as you can see, I quickly ran out of paint, and that's because I mixed a very minimal amount to begin with. I generally like to start by mixing smaller amounts, that way I get a chance to kind of test my paint, my pigment, and all of that. So I did that. Now I'm going to mix up a bit more, and I'm going to make it a little bit more blue, and I'm going to add a hint of Mars Black, which will darken and desaturate it just a little bit. Now we'll go back to our painting and reapply this for the sky. Now that I have the main area of open sky done, I'm going to head back to my palette and I'm going to mix up a slightly darker variant. So I'm going to add a lot more blue this time. I'm going to mix it right beside / on top of my initial mixture, that way I can see how they're differing and to make sure that I actually am making a darker mixture here. So here you can see, as I'm applying it to the edges, we get a very dramatic difference. And we can blend this into our initial application by just using this tap and drag effect, as you can see right here. It's making a nice, soft change of application, color. And I can drag this out a little bit farther. And the more I expand, the darker and the more rich I want the pigment to become. So here you can see that it is a little bit darker than this past application, and it has a little bit more blue in it as well. And we're doing this because we're getting farther and farther away from the light in the center of the sky, and we're getting towards the edges and the clouds. So now that that's done, I'm going to switch over to my smaller round-headed brush because this is going to give me an opportunity to use more detail. Now I'm going to take some titanium white, going to mix in just a hint of our primary blue, and we're going to create a highlight for our clouds. Now I'm going to start along the edges of my clouds in the brightest area. So if this is the brightest area, the brightest clouds will be here, and then they'll get darker and darker. So I'm starting closest to the middle, and then I'm just drawing in the edges of some clouds. It's going to be lighter than the pigment that we currently have on the canvas, so it'll show up as a highlight. So here I'm taking my highlight and we'll create a cloud right here. We'll create a separation. So there's a cloud on this side, there's a cloud here. I'm creating the highlights on the edge of this cloud. And as you can see, while I use the round-headed brush, the edges are still a little bit sharp, but I'm going to blend the back of these edges into our cloud. And it's going to dissipate, and it's eventually going to blend in with this color. Now we're going to grab a smaller square-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water to again condense the bristles, extend the wet life of my paint, and help me drag it farther on the canvas. Now we're going to be working on these mountains. And these mountains are fairly far away, so we're not going to see the innate color of the mountains. We're going to see a light from the sky cast down on the mountains and all of those colors reflected off them. So here, for my mountains, I'm actually going to use the same colors: primary blue, Mars black, and titanium white. Now I'm going to start by creating the edge to it while I have the most paint on my brush, while it's still fairly damp, because right now I have more control than I will ever have with this pigment and this brush. Now I'm going to get towards the bottom of the mountain here, and I'm going to grab a little bit more Mars black, work that into our mixture, and now I'll apply that at the bottom and then start blending it up. And I'm doing this because as you get farther and farther down the mountain, less light can hit it, more shadow is cast upon it, and you simply lose that very notable bright blue that's being reflected on it. I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush, dip the tip of it in some water, I'm going to head over to my palette, I'm going to grab a lot of primary yellow, I do mean a lot, and I'm going to grab about a third of that of primary blue. Now, I want to create the base layer for my trees first, and so I want it to be a bit darker. So I'm going to take that same pigment, I'm going to move it over here on my palette with the addition of some Mars black, and I'll also throw in a hint of titanium white to thicken up the pigment as well. This will act as a good base layer for all of my foliage. And now I'm going to start just applying where I want my clusters of trees and foliage to be. So I'm using the smaller square-headed brush right now because it can carry a good amount of paint, but it can still work along the sharp edges that I have here. There we go. We also have trees right here, but I'm not going to do them right now because I don't want to split my focus between the two, and these are at a different depth than these. So they're going to be painted with slightly different colors and values. Now that we have our main outline of trees, we're going to make the edges much brighter. And that's because the light from the center is reaching all of it. So I'm going to go back to my palette. I'm going to take some titanium white. I'm going to mix that in with the green that we had here on our palette. And here you can see we have something that's much brighter already. I'm going to go over to the edges of different trees and I'm going to tap this on. I'm going to apply a little bit less of our highlight here because it's going to be blocked a little bit by the mountains, and I just don't want it to pop as much. Doesn't need to pop equally all the way around. Select different areas that you think will be getting more light and areas that you want to highlight more, and that's when you incorporate this. Now I have a little bit of a field down here just of grass, so I'm going to fill that in. I'm going to take a lot of that highlighted pigment because I'm going to assume that a lot of that highlight is going to get right down here. Just work with my sharp edge. I'll blend down, then I'll grab a little bit of our darker pigment, apply that at the bottom here, blend it back up, and I'll use these streaky applications that work around. That way it looks like there's a little bit of depth in the grass, maybe it looks like the grass is blowing in the wind, and we just get a nice interesting effect right there. From there, I'm going to switch back to my smaller square-headed brush. I'm going to grab more of our burnt umber, a good amount, grab a bit of our Mars black, a bit of our titanium white, mix these together to create a bit of a darker burnt umber base layer that's still fairly thick. We're going to apply that right here and move it out onto our beach. Now I'm going to take some titanium white, some burnt umber, mix up a nice, rich, bright brown, going to start applying this on top of our sand. It's going to give it a bit more of a three-dimensional look. I'm letting some of the darker sand show through, blend. Just create something nice. Now I'm going to jump back into the painting with my medium-sized square-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water, head over to my palette, grab a good amount of primary blue, about a quarter of that in titanium white, and then another quarter of that in Mars black. And this is going to produce a fairly dark but rich blue, which I'm now going to apply around the water that surrounds our main subject. I'm going to create a brighter blue, so I'll do that right below this one so that I get to see the contrast of the two. Still grab a hint of Mars black. And now I'm going to apply this along the edge and work it back, because the most light is going to be working itself along this edge. However, we will get a little bit of a shadow cast from these down into the water, so I might actually just start right here and work my way back and forth with these lines from the foreground, or from the background rather, to the foreground. Now, after taking a little break from the sand here, I've decided that I want a little bit more brown in the painting. So I'm going to take my medium-sized square-headed brush, grab some burnt umber, a little bit of Mars black, a little bit of titanium white, create a nice darker brown. I'm going to continue this a little bit farther out in our painting. Going to have it connect down here, give us a bit of a longer beach. Now I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush, dip the tip of it in some water, and I'm going to work on the silos that we have right beside our barn here. So I'll grab some Mars black and some titanium white, and I'll mix up a fairly dark, consistent gray. Then I'm going to go over to them. I'm going to apply it initially on the edge of our silo, because again, when we are beginning an application, that's when we have the most control, because we have the most paint, our brush is the most damp, and we can create the best detail work. And from there, we can start to add some depth. So I'm going to add a highlight to the tops and the edges. I'm going to grab some titanium white and mix that in with our previous application. Then I'm going to create some very delicate little line work around here. And then I'm going to add this highlight to the edge because the light's coming this way, which means, yet again, the side that's facing us is going to be the darkest. So I want to transition from a light edge and top down to a darker backside. Now I'm going to hop into the actual barn. For that, I'm going to be using some primary red. But primary red's fairly thin of a pigment. I'd have to do a lot of layers. So I'm going to mix in some Mars black and a little bit of titanium white. It's going to gray it down a little bit, but it'll also thicken the pigment. And this will be a good base layer that we can build on top of. So much like the rest of our painting, we're going to start with a darker base layer, and we're going to add our midtones and our highlights on top. Here, still using that smaller square-headed brush, because it has all of this great ability to create detail. Now that I have all of that applied, the red has had a little bit of a chance to dry, so I'm going to take some primary red, and you know what, I'll take some pure primary red. And I'm going to work this down as if they are individual red boards. Now, I also feel like this area is a little barren, so I'm going to throw a couple extra trees into it. Take some primary yellow, primary blue, Mars black, and then I'll just create some individual little leaves here. And we'll go back and we'll fill in the branches in a second. Now I'll add highlight by taking our primary yellow, mixing that in there, taking some titanium white, and then a little bit of blue again, just so it isn't too olivey. Throw this around the outskirts, the edges, the ones that'll catch the most light. These are all individual little leaves, so we're trying to give them all shape and form and make sure they're all different from one another. Some of them are clusters, some of them are spread apart. Now we'll head back to our darker burnt umber mix, grab a little burnt umber, a little bit of Mars black, mix it in with a little bit of titanium white, and we'll just create some very small branches with a tapping effect that'll connect the loose pieces together. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.